Hello and welcome. I'm excited to introduce you to this episode of Viewpoint on the Ask Krishna channel. Today we have Jonathan Edelmann, a prolific scriptural researcher on this show. Over the next hour, we will go deeper into the topic of Puranas and their applicability to contemporary life, meaning its balance with science and day-to-day practices. Through a Q&A format, we will focus on the Bhagavata Purana, the foremost among the Puranic scriptures and an authority in its own right. John Edelmann has a doctorate in religious studies and theology from the Oxford University. He has so many publications to his credit. His research is in twofold areas. The first one is on the Bhagavata Purana, as well as the Sanskrit and the theological and the philosophical traditions that surround it. He has focused on thinkers looking at their conceptions of bhakti or devotion and religious experiences, and ultimately selfhood. The second type of research from John is the manner in which Hindu thought and Indian philosophy has interacted with a broader ecosystem. John has argued for a discussion or samvada between the Hindu thought and the evolutionary sciences, particularly on one that respects the autonomy and value of multiple perspectives in our ongoing discovery in this world. It is with this mindset of samvada that we go deeper into the topic of Bhagavata Purana with John. Without further delay, please join me on this dialogue with John Edelmann. Before we go further, please don't forget to subscribe to the Ask Krishna channel and support this channel. To have many more of these spiritually rich videos that allow you to live a life of faith, free from fear, and live a life of common sense and rationality. Let's talk to John. Good. Hey John, good morning. Good to see you, and thank you so much for taking some time today to talk to us, to talk to the community about a very, very important topic. Which we are going to cover today about Puranas. And I'm really looking forward. You come with an extensive knowledge in this area. You have done research. Really looking forward for an engaging discussion. It's all about perspectives, getting your viewpoint, and hopefully it drives home some key points to the community that they can benefit in their daily life.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really pleased to be here.
Excellent. Now, John, before we get started into the topics, let's just start off with how did this interest you? I mean, this whole this entire scheme of Puranas, getting into kind of the Eastern scriptures. How did that even come across? How did that interest you?
Yeah. Well, kind of ground zero for me. I actually have a very specific moment. I remember it was in Mr. Potts in my I think it was either junior or senior English literature class in high school, and we had to read Henry David Thoreau and the chapter called Economy in his book Walden, and I was initially not so taken in by it, but then I started to read some things in there that I liked. I liked his way of writing. I liked what he was doing and what he was talking about. And then after high school, I picked it up again and I read it again. And he goes into some detail about Indian thought, Chinese thought, ancient Greek thought. So it was back then that I started to take an interest in ancient literature, and then especially Indian Sanskrit literature, and it kind of went on from there. And then I spent some time after high school reading around more extensively and uh, dabbling in different communities, and then in university I had the opportunity to study with people that worked on Hinduism and Sanskrit language, and kind of just I went on from there, really.
Excellent, excellent. And
Yeah.
as you went on with the journey, how did you chart out the path of let me focus more on the Puranic side versus, let's assume, taking either a Gita or something like that. But I know you went
Yeah.
on the Purana and then you went into other things as well.
I really just liked the Bhagavata Purana. I don't know why. I had been exposed to other things. I'd read the Bhagavad Gita, I'd read some of the Upanishads, some Vedanta, but I really liked, and I still do. I still think it's a fascinating. I've been reading it for over 20 years at this point, and I still find it to be a fascinating text, unique and special and different. I don't really know why. There's a lot of things I can say about what I like specifically about the Bhagavata and why I've continued to have an interest in it. But why do I have those specific interests? It's hard. I guess that's a more deep philosophical question. Like why are certain people drawn to certain things as opposed to others? I Yeah, I'd really have to think about. Yeah, yeah,
No, gotcha. Understand.
yeah,
Completely get it. Some
yeah,
of those scriptures really kind of engage us. They draw
yeah,
us. They draw attention to us, and there is no right or wrong in that. It's just that we get deeper into it and we find meaning. So completely could
yeah,
understand.
yeah, yeah. I just remember the first time I started reading. I guess it was the size of the text, and it was this epic
Mm.
text that included philosophy, theology, narrative, science. It was comprehensive, and the way it was set up, the narrative structure, the way it was set up. I found the whole thing really um, just creative, very creative and unique. Yeah.
What I found fascinating, and I would love to get your thoughts on this, is how deep it goes into some of what we could call as more scientific
Mm.
expositions of today. I mean,
Yeah.
like even like the book three of the Bhagavatam, as you know, and the book
Yeah.
two goes into like the cosmic manifestation, the whole creation process. How do you, from your standpoint, relate this? What is your perspective? How does that relate to, let's say, contemporary science when we talk about manifestation, the creation process?
Yeah. It's a it's a whole. It's not just the Bhagavata that has this cosmology or cosmogony. It's really, to me, what the Bhagavata and the other Puranas are doing is kind of representing um, and and representing a much bigger Indian picture that was prominent then, and it's a very different perspective on on realities. There's whole time is so different, divided up in such a different way with these massive ages of the yugas, the cyclical process of creation and destruction, this idea that humanity goes back so far into time. It's so different from the West, and the way that the Western science, I mean, the way that the universe is populated, different planets, and um, the way that the planets are discussed and described, it is totally different. It's in many ways it's so different than contemporary physics and cosmology and astronomy and things like that. So it gives, for me, it's a whole window and picture into a different world, a different way of thinking about and conceiving the world. And to me, when I read it, and what I still think is true, is that the the interaction between India and Europe must take these differesses very seriously, because it is the way that the Bhagavata represents the cosmos, the world. It's fundamental to not just a Hindu way of looking at reality, or Vedic, but it's really Indian. It's really the way that Indians in South Asia conceptualized things and conceptualized the world around them. And it does differ from modern science. It is different. To me, it's a real point of conversation that must be taken seriously, because what are civilizations to do with their history and their past and the way that they looked at things is a question. Is modern science something that is so powerful and unique that it can be that it just, like, what, it just bowls over, it just rolls over everything of the past? Or are there things to be retained from ancient ways of looking at things that are still relevant today? Those were the kinds of questions I dealt with in one of my first book. And I still think about them and toss them around and try to deal with them in different ways. And yeah, I guess the model, or the way that I think about it now, is that there, in the Bhagavata, and especially in the Bhagavata, there is a way that they were aware of a kind of a relationship of what we would call science and religion. There's a discourse, or a dialogue, or a whole literature on religion and science. There's courses taught at the undergraduate and graduate level at many universities. There's lots of books published on this topic. So it is, science and religion is a topic. And I think the Bhagavata is very aware that this is a topic, as well. And so there is an attempt there to describe how scientific knowledge, and not just specific scientific theories, but the activity of science, and the body of knowledge that we call science, how that can be used and put into the service of what we might call religion. That's what I've tried to, at least in my first book, that's what I tried to extract from the Bhagavata. What is that model that it presents? As to
And
yeah, go ahead. Yeah,
sorry. No,
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 go
keep
ahead.
going. Sorry.
No,
Keep going.
no, go ahead. I'm happy to.
No, I just wanted to double click on that a bit more, which
Yeah.
is, as you were looking, I love where you're going with this, by the way. The fact that you were mapping out the aspect of science, you were keeping the Bhagavata as kind of the backdrop. And not only that, then you brought up religion into it and said, okay, how does that all now come together in that space? If I were to double click on it a little bit more, were there any obvious biases that you found, either that were going more into the scientific side of the world or into the religious side of it? Or was the Bhagavata, in your view, sharing, lack of a better word, some assertive truths?
To me, the Bhagavata is an attempt by it's within the Puranic genre, right? So that the Puranas in general have certain topics that they deal with. The Bhagavatas distinguishes itself because it deals with 10 topics as opposed to 5, but a number of those topics and all the Puranas are cosmological. They have to do with the origin of the universe, how it was created, and how humanity was created, how animals and plants and all kinds of biological life were created. I'm not sure. It's a huge project, and I'm engaged with scholars here in Gainesville in Florida. It's a kind of independent research institute called the Bhaktivedanta Institute. There's branches around the world, but we've got one here in Gainesville, and there's a group of scholars who are very kind of keen to figure out exactly what was the cosmological picture in the Bhagavata. They're kind of helping people that work in India in a place called in Bengal, a place called Mayapur, where they've built a massive temple there, and there's going to be a kind of museum diorama type of depiction of the Bhagavata's cosmological scheme. And so the people that I'm aware of here and working with here are they're trying to send them information about it. So it's still very much an unsolved mystery. Where is this information coming from about the cosmos? And there's different views about it. It's clearly, to me, the Bhagavata is clearly it's drawing from and it's speaking to the best of its day. I think whenever it was composed, and that's still a matter of some controversy. But I think it was trying to draw from whatever was the kind of state of the art of the time. And that's not true just of the science, but all of the different topics that it covers. And it covers a wide range of different topics. And I don't think it's got a particular partisan view in terms of the science, so to speak. But it's rather it's partisan, or its particularity is how it's understood. It gets couched within a very particular Krishna narrative, a Krishna-centered narrative. It's just espousing the centrality of the worship of Krishna over other gods, even Vishnu and Narayana, especially Shiva and the goddess and other alternatives. So that's what it's, to me, that's the underlying thesis of the Bhagavata. And then once you see that underlying thesis, then the different topics that it covers, even its discussion of, say, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, and all of the different avatars and different philosophical systems that it brings in, that is all, I think, in the service of espousing the centrality of Krishna. So that's where I see as its primary. I forget the word you use, but something like partisanship, and not so much in the actual sciences. I'm not sure it was particularly concerned with what the details of the scientific world that it is presenting. I'm not sure it was particularly concerned with that, but of making sure that the reader understood that this cosmological scheme that we're presenting, the point of the text, the reason it gets incorporated, I think, is to argue that Krishna is the source of this world. He sustains this world. He's immanent within the world, and so forth.
And no, that's, you actually are leading into something that I was going into as you were describing it.
Yeah.
I find it, and I'm fully with you on it, which is there is this element where it gradually starts off, but then it transitions and converges to Krishna, to your point, and puts that kind of in a higher plane versus anything else in that regard. What I also found interesting is in those discussions and reading through it is the stories that have been given to demonstrate the, for lack of a better word again, like the super consciousness or the supreme itself. And whether it is the story of Kapila or all the different stories that are in there,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
how
I
do you,
mean,
yeah,
yeah.
go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even the story of Kapila, it's a, so Kapila, of course, is the traditional founder of the Sankhya school. That's what historians would say. We don't really, historians would say we don't really know too much about the actual Kapila, but he's the one that everybody
Hmm.
points to, like Patanjali as the kind of founder of yoga and so forth.
Hmm.
But then the Bhagavata it creates a whole narrative
Mm.
around him with Devahuti, and so it's, I'm sure your readers are familiar with the story, but that the placement and the articulation of Kapila really supports this idea that why is this thesis that the reason that things like Sankhya are
Mm.
even described is to illuminate its religious thesis that Krishna is the source of things, because who is Kapila? It's a form of Krishna. And then the reason that Devahuti, who's Kapila's mother, the reason that she inquired, if you read that section, those sections in the third book of the Bhagavata, the way that Sankhya comes out, the narrative that it's put within is Devahuti's stress, her anxiety, I guess we would call it today, her suffering. She's
Hmm.
trying to alleviate her own pain and suffering. I think because her husband has died, there's been a tragedy in her life. And so her son, who's Kapila, who is Krishna, she asks him, tell me how to get rid of my suffering. So then he launches into the Sankhya philosophy. And so it's very explicitly wed to the goal of understanding reality in a particular way, distinguishing between matter and spirit, between the Purusha and the Prakriti, as a way of removing existential pain, suffering, which is there in classical Sankhya. I mean, the Sankhya Karika of Ishvara Krishna, for example, opens up with that. It says, the reason that you need to have this understanding of the distinction between Purusha and Prakriti is because without it you suffer. And our way of relieving suffering is to produce this knowledge of the difference. So it's there in the classical philosophical system, but the Bhagavata puts it into a narrative structure and a theological structure that supports its goals. And at the same time, it does a really great job of describing the philosophical views. It tells you, it gives you the philosophy as well. So it kind of, it's doing a lot of things at once, which it makes it really unique.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now you deal a lot with youngsters. I mean, you have students in your classrooms, graduates, right, of all different ages and stuff,
Yeah,
different diversities, different backgrounds, ethnicities.
yeah,
One of the key aspects, as you said, that Kapila drives when Kapila's mother asks for, almost like treats Kapila as a guru, like a teacher,
Yeah.
and seeks
Yeah.
guidance. Um, One of the aspects that the Bhagavatam drives very much is this aspect of surrender or moksha, right? Like offering, remembering, giving up everything to a divine. As you interact with your students, particularly of the contemporary, which I always say, the contemporary life individuals, how does this resonate? I mean, what's their reaction when they hear you teach and spread this message? How do they take this entire knowledge of this book as you communicate it to them?
Well, we can talk about this idea of moksha soon. I don't know if I agree. I think the Bhagavata is a kind of at a turning point in Indian thought where moksha is getting supplanted by bhakti as the primary purushartha or goal of life. But yeah, I've been teaching undergraduate and graduate students for 15 years now, I guess, Indian thought and Indian philosophy broadly. And I've seen universities change. I think that what I do and how it's perceived and received has changed quite a bit, especially over the past 5 years. I've seen just it's not universities change, the way that things are talked about and context. So I've just had such a wide range of different experiences, but in general, I'd say, I've got basically two groups of students. I've had two groups of students over the years. Um, there are those who just take the class because it's a requirement, or it fulfills the requirement, and it happens to be at the right time of day, or it fits within their schedule. So that's really a good chunk of the students. And then there are others that they're really interested. They want to understand what's going on in Indian thought. And that group of students is also quite diverse. Um, Within that group are students who are very religious. Maybe they're Christian or Jewish. They tend to be Christian or Jewish. There's those students who they're interested in, how does Indian religion differ than my own? For whatever reason, they're interested in that topic, and they're sincere. I've had a lot of students that just sincerely want to understand the similarities and differences between, for lack of a better term, Eastern and Western religion. I've had a lot of Indian students, Hindu students, who not it's not as common as you might think, but they are few and far between. But it's been surprising how few there are of Indian students who want to take the opportunity to study Indian religion. So I've had students like that in the second group, and then there are those who are interested in Indian spirituality, people who do yoga, meditation. Maybe they practice Buddhist meditation or some type of transcendental meditation, or they're into bhakti yoga or Advaita Vedanta. They've so to speak converted to, they wouldn't phrase it like that necessarily, but I kind of think of it in that way. They've taken up a personal interest for whatever reason in Indian thought, and they want to take the class as a way to deepen their textual knowledge of it and their history and things like that. That's been the groups of students. Yeah, yeah.
Have they related anything about, for the ones who have been very serious about this? To your point, I like the categorization you made of the two. which is,
Yeah.
hey, this is my major or minor. Let me just check the box. I got to take it. It
Yeah.
suits my semester, so I got to take it. But then there's other who are more serious about it. Now, for the ones who got into it, um, do you see them, even if they have shared or in your own observation, impacting like almost like a life transformation, even if it is not like full transformation, at least just getting onto that, helping them with decision making, helping them with morality, as an example? Has that even come across? Has that?
Yes, it has. Yeah, sure. Especially in the smaller classes where there's an opportunity to really get to know them. I've taught some really large classes, and that's hard. It's hard to know how they're receiving it if you've got 100 students in the classroom or whatever. Um, but in the smaller classes and graduate seminars, yeah, I think that, as I said, some students come in with the hope and expectation that they're going to be able to develop themselves and their own understanding of a personal interest that they have. And I did find that a number of students, it really shaped what they thought about themselves. I've had some students who really wanted to make a career out of it. I've had undergraduate students who said, "No, this is deeply interesting to me. I've really learned something about myself. I understand myself in a different way that I like, and and there's something here for me to pursue." So I've had, again, it's few and far between, but about once a year, I've had students who say, I want to continue doing this. I'd like to learn the language. I'd like to study more of the books. I'd like to save up my money and go to a graduate school, or maybe get a master's, or even some want to get a PhD. And um, because it drew them in some way. I don't have too many students that take that kind of interest just because um, they see it as a viable career move. Most of the students that I've had who want to pursue further study do it because they find something in it that um, meant something to them.
Got it.
Yeah.
And in terms of the ones that really wanted to, just one more point on that and then we'll move on. In
Yeah.
terms of the ones who really wanted to, like as you said, make a career out of it, and I'm assuming when you say career, it's more about, hey, I've gained some knowledge, let me now put it to use and offer that up, and in turn, of course, let it help my living. I'm assuming that's in that context
Yeah.
you made that.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, so moving on, just a few more things about the Bhagavatam and
Yeah.
particularly some areas, and then I want to touch upon a topic which I know you have spent a lot of thought and cycles, which is about reincarnation. I'll come to that in a bit more.
Okay. Yeah.
But before we go there, the one of the striking things, and I wanted to get your perspective about this when I see the Bhagavata, the Purana itself, is the the aspect which it looks like the universe in totality and talks about devotion not just in humans but also, let's say, in animals. I mean, the whole story of Gajendra Moksha, as you uh, very well know, right, with the
Yeah.
elephant. um, what's your perspective of that? Was that more of, hey, we spoke a lot about humans, now let's include something more in the scripture? Was that, how do you see that, or do you see that more natural?
I mean, the Bhagavad is it's such and Indian thought more broadly is so creative and so imaginative. Um, I'm reading Hegel, uh, the philosopher Hegel, and so I don't want to overemphasize this because I've been reading Hegel, but Hegel was one of the first German philosophers, one of the first Western European philosophers to really read Indian thought, Chinese thought, and other other thought systems and take it very seriously as an idea. But his characterization was that India is this place of imagination. I think he's got something to say here. I don't agree with everything he says about India, and I haven't fully assimilated all of his arguments yet. But India, I think just the Bhagavata and Indian thought is so creative in terms of its narratives and its stories. And I love I've written about the churning of the ocean of milk, which is just, I think, a very profoundly interesting story. But the stories about the interaction between humans and animals, and sort of how animals have an interior cognitive life and are able to achieve moksha. There's a couple ways I can look at it, and I think in some ways it's something what the Indian philosophers call the Kamutya Nyaya. The if it what is it the logic of, if this is true, then what to speak of this? It's the what to speak of that. So I think the Bhagavata, as I mentioned before, is at a period in Indian thought where the Brahminical tradition, the Sanskritic, the Brahmin scholars, and the learned tradition, who are they're orthodox, they are devout Hindus, so to speak, although the word was not really in currency then, but they accept the authority of the Veda Samhitas and the Upanishads and the other Puranas and the Gita, and they accept the eternality of the Atma, of the soul, which you wanted to talk about. And they accept these things in contradistinction from non-Hindu schools like Buddhists, who don't accept the Vedas and who don't accept the unchangeability of the soul, and the Jains, who don't accept the Vedic authority and have a kind of unique vision of the soul. But the Bhagavata, to me, is a period when the Orthodox Brahminical, the elite of India, took on board some of the criticisms of Buddhists and Jains against the caste system and the eligibility or the capacity of non-Brahmins and women to attain moksha, to attain liberation. And so I think some of the stories are, as I said, a kind of the Kamutya Nyaya, if this is possible, what to speak of that? So if animals can achieve, if Gajendra can achieve moksha through Krishna bhakti, then what to speak of humans, right? So if even they can do it, then what to speak of us? So it's a powerful rhetorical way of saying, of course, and the Bhagavata explicitly says, even non-Brahmins, even people from outside of the Indian subcontinent can achieve liberation, because even animals can do it. So I think it's happening. Those stories are part of just a very brilliant and creative and imaginative thought world that created these really enticing stories. Part of it's that, and part of it's this in reinforcing the idea that bhakti is this powerful new process, that not new, but a powerful process that is now being, that we should really take very seriously. That's what the Bhagavata, I think, is doing. That we know about dharma, we know about the Vedic karma means that gets spelled out very early in the text. We know about the process of jnana, of a kind of spiritual knowledge, a spiritual understanding of non-duality and of the self and things like that. But here's something that doesn't erode and doesn't it doesn't obliterate the need for the Vedic tradition and the emerging jnana tradition of Advaita. It doesn't, the Bhakti and the Bhagavata doesn't, I've not seen anything where it says totally forget about these things, leave them behind, but it's arguing that this process of bhakti, the method and what it offers is something that these other two processes cannot offer, and they can fit in with bhakti in a kind of complex way. They support it in different ways, and that's why they should not be abandoned. But they bhakti is something different, and it is better. That's what it's arguing. And one of the reasons it's better is that even Gajendra, and he was able to achieve moksha through it. So what to speak of everybody else? Yeah, that's my take on what's going on with those stories. Yeah.
I love that. I love that, and particularly even if animals can achieve, hey, what about everybody? I mean, why not,
Yeah.
right? So I think
Right.
that's absolutely a point being communicated, and also I like the way you put it about um, it's not negating jnana karma, but it's elevating and highlighting bhakti, and also as part of that, driving home the point of leading that type of of reflecting and contemplating. I mean, in fact, the whole story starts off right with Parikshit having only 7 days to live, and here the king saying, "Hey, in my last 7 days, let me learn about the truth."
Yeah.
Um, mm,
Yeah. It really. I think that was probably when I first read it. That was one of the most interesting things about it. It's like, okay, because in the Western tradition we have this phrase "memento mori," like contemplate your own death. Think about the angel of death sitting on every word. You must consider your mortality. And I've always been, I think about the fact that life is very short, and on a kind of daily basis. And I liked the way it framed it. What if you did know your time of death? Would it be an advantage or a disadvantage? And what would you do? It's um, and then the text moves from Parikshit's particular situation where he's bitten by a snake, and he's been told you've got 7 days to live. I guess the venom's going to kick in and kill him after 7 days or something like that. But it goes from him as an example of having to make that decision about what to do with this short amount of time, and it kind of forces one and invites one to think, well, what if I had 7 days? What would I do with them? It's a powerful question. It's a powerful way to start a book. Yeah, and so and that immediately reframes it. It doesn't tell him. The text's answer is not do a Vedic sacrifice. It doesn't say simply meditate on Brahman. And see the non-duality of Atman and Brahman. It doesn't say that. It immediately launches into the bhakti perspective, which is why I think it's a kind of an important text in this shift within India away from within the Brahminical elite, within the learned and orthodox Hindu tradition, away from Vedic sacrifice and a purely non-dualistic Advaitic way of looking at things, because it's so clear. It's really telling, it's really making, in a very dramatic way, it very explicit that this is what the goal of life must be. If you've only got 7 days left, then this must be the Purushartha. If this is what Parikshita does, this must be the Purushartha that reigns supreme over the other options.
Couldn't agree more on
Yeah.
the particularly on why bhakti became such an important concept is to spread it to the masses, right? And not narrow the
Right.
philosophy of the learning to a certain sect or a class, but just spread
Right.
it out.
That's it. That's one of its points, that the ability to do Vedic ritual is limited to a small group of Brahmins, to birth,
Yeah.
and the Kshatriyas, and karma and jnana is also in its own way limited to a small group of people who have that intellectual capacity to do so. This, however, it's a wide open practice.
Yep. And devotion can definitely be pervasive in that sense. So completely.
Yeah.
Switching gears in the time we have, like
Yeah.
to get to one of the favorite topics in your research and work you've done, which I know you're going to continue to do more about it, is the reincarnation aspect.
Yeah.
So two things would be great to hear your perspectives, and then I feel we should do a whole video on reincarnation,
Okay.
just given the
Yeah.
depth of it. But
Yeah.
just for this one, since this was more focused on Bhagavatam and Purana,
Yeah.
number one, what do you think about reincarnation? How does that make sense in a contemporary life, even with your own observations with the individuals you interact, students you interact? And secondly, maybe a brief touch upon, again, we'll do a separate video, brief touch upon the criteria. Like, is there any prerequisites for reincarnation?
Yeah. So I said at the beginning that the native or indigenous science of India is a big point of contradistinction with contemporary Western thought. The other side of that, and I think they are kind of connected, is the concept of self as being reborn, which we've had that in the West. There are prominent thinkers in the West who seem to have espoused some kind of reincarnation model. It was well known enough that people within the West argued against it throughout European history. But the general tenor of Indian and European thought fundamentally differ on this point. For the most part, European thought has been either a one life theism, that if it's a theistic model, you're born once and you die once, and that's your opportunity to attain salvation or not. The Indian model, and this is not just true of Hinduism, but of all the Indian religions, it's a cyclical process of it's very different. And I think the cosmology of India is connected to that with its vast timescales. The yuga system that I alluded to at the beginning here, this conversation, is almost a requirement. It is a requirement of a reincarnation model. If every soul has always been in a process of reincarnation, of moving from one body to the next, it follows that the universe and human populations must also be eternal. If you go back 10 billion years, there must have been human beings around. If you go back 100 billion years or 10 trillion years, it doesn't matter, because if the self is eternal and it's been eternally in a process of birth and rebirth, then the universe and human populations and animals and plants and all of the things that we have today must have always been around, which is so different than the Western view, which looks at the universe itself as having a beginning point, and then things slowly develop. You get formation of stars and planets, and then they develop atmospheres, and single cell creatures begin to get created somehow, at least on Earth and maybe elsewhere, but at the very least on Earth. And then from there, things evolve over time, and eventually, roughly 100,000 years ago, you get prototypical human beings, and then maybe 10,000 years ago, you get formations of civilizations and cultures, and literacy happens maybe 6 to 7,000 years ago, 5 to 6, 7,000 years ago, and boom, here we are. That's so different than the Western model. And so the cosmology, the concept of time and space is so different because of the underlying more fundamental difference, which is rebirth, and the difference between a one life and a many lives scenario. So any possibility of dialogue or discourse between India and Europe has to take this deep difference very, very seriously. How is that to be done? Is a different, that not different, but that's a question. One way of doing it that I've looked at, that you mentioned this, the criteria. There was a guy named Ian Stevens, a professor at the University of Virginia, named Ian Stevenson, and he had one way of studying it. He developed I'm sure many of your viewers are aware, but he interviewed children who claimed to have had memories of a previous life. And he would interview them and collect data from them, and he would write it down, and then he would see if they were correct, if they described a village that was 20 miles away or whatever. He'd go there and see if what they were describing was any way accurate. And then he tried to exclude the possibility that they obtained that knowledge through some kind of normal means. Somebody told them about it, or they heard about it, or they saw it on TV, or heard it on the radio, or whatever. And what he argued is that they were not able. What he found is that they were not able to obtain that in certain cases. I think he had 20. His first book was 20, and then he published more and more and more. They were not able to obtain that knowledge that they had through normal means. So I started reading this again, maybe 20 years ago or so. I found it very interesting. It's an interesting way to address this difference. So I started talking with a professor of forensics, of child psychology. His specialty was to interview. It was how you interview children who have witnessed something in a forensic context. Say a child has seen something that the police want to know about, or detectives or whatever. How do you properly interview a child so that you don't, so you get an accurate representation of their thought? Because children are more susceptible and more easily manipulated than an adult is. So you have to be very extra careful and vigilant that you don't lead them on. So we started to talk about Stevenson and look at how he interviewed children. And then he went back. So what we did is we said, well, we borrowed from I borrowed from his expertise
Mm.
in child psychology and forensics, and he borrowed from my expertise in Indian thought, and we came up with criteria. What if you're interviewing children, and if you're obtaining information from them that is supposed to verify a particular view, um, what's the right way to do that? How do you do that? Then we developed a statistical model to distinguish between just randomly obtained um, information or randomly portrayed information and actual knowledge. Like if you ask me to describe a town that I've never been to, and
Mm-hmm.
say 10 things about the town,
Mm.
I might be able to give you a pretty accurate description of, oh, it's got a CVS. If I'm describing a town I've never been to in Florida, I could say, it's got a CVS and a Walgreens, and they're right across the street from one another. Wow, okay. It's got a Starbucks, and the Starbucks is in a really busy part of town. Yeah, I could probably tell you 10 things about a town in Florida that I've never been to, but it doesn't mean I've got paranormal knowledge of it. So what kind of specific information do you need to provide?
Mm-hmm.
When does that specific information indicate really paranormal knowledge, or just you just happen to get it right? So we were dealing with those topics. Yeah, but that's only one way of addressing this issue, and it has its own limitations. Even if you were able to provide a slam dunk case, um, that somebody had paranormal knowledge, and I think it's still these debates are still going on. There's still people working on this. Jim Tucker is kind of the
Yeah.
successor of. He might be a fun person for us to tag into if he's willing to tag into this, but he's still working on these issues. But even if you have, and I'm supportive, I think I'm not naysaying it. I think the research should be done and continued. But even if you do have a slam dunk case where you show that a child or an adult, but generally it's children who have this knowledge, did have really deep paranormal knowledge of a previous life, that's still a far cry from the Indian reincarnation model, where you've got
Absolutely.
an
Yeah.
infinite number
Yeah.
of lives.
I
Yeah,
Yeah, I want to make sure we give this the quality time, and we do. So, to your point, yes, great to see if Tucker and along with us talk about, and but I think reincarnation in itself is such a heavy topic. We would have to spend a good solid time doing that. So, would again really appreciate. We'll schedule a follow up with you on that. Um, this has
great.
been great. I know we are coming close to the hour.
Yeah.
Before we wrap this episode, just wanted to ask you one final question. What do you see missing in the Bhagavata Purana? If you had a wish, what would you say it should have covered?
What do I see missing? Oh, let's see. Um, That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know if I'm not sure anybody's ever asked me that before. What do I see as missing in the Bhagavata?
Like if you thought, hey, I wish
Yeah.
it had gone on this area or something like that.
Well, it would have been nice
Mm-hmm.
if it's so vast,
Mm.
it's so capacious, it integrates so many different topics and things. narratively and philosophically, cosmologically, theologically. It would have been nice if it had a kind of very explicit, maybe it does have this, but telling us exactly how it should be understood, and how it's to be interpreted. The term we use in the West is hermeneutics, a kind of hermeneutical, like this is how we want to be read. Okay, that's one thing. I guess the biggest thing, though, and this is maybe just something I wish Indian thought in general had, is tell us when and where it's coming from. It's okay. So it's espousing a divine view. It comes from Vyasa. It's written after Krishna has departed. It's the very beginning of Kali Yuga. That's when it says it was written. And I understand that many people would take that as a matter of faith, and but I don't think it necessarily was written 5,000 years ago. It doesn't really get it. It doesn't get Madhva and Vopadev and Himadri are the really first people to really write about the Bhagavata. There's no manuscripts older than about 900 years, 1,000 years. People aren't really discussing it much before about 1,000 years ago. So I think it probably comes about around that time. Otherwise, people would have been discussing it before that. So I think it may have come around. So just tell us, like, what I get it. You want to put it within a spiritual narrative, and people did that back in the days. It's how people wrote. But I think one of the things about being a scholar of Indian thought is the difficulty of dating texts, of putting, and that's a Western interest, and I admit that's something. When it's just the way I think about things, and I pick up a book, I want to know when and where it came from. I have and this is a modern historical consciousness that comes about in the West very strongly a couple hundred years ago. But that's what I want. If I pick up Aristotle, I want to know, when was this written? Where was it written? If I'm reading Aquinas now, I want to know, and we want to know a great amount of detail. If I'm reading one of Aquinas's works, I want to know, did he write this at the end of his life, or was this the first thing that he wrote? Because it's interesting to think about how a text differs within the lifetime of a particular author. What were they doing when they wrote this particular book? Who were they responding to? What was new happening in their life? So that is a Western interest. We want to couch things in a historical narrative, and that's really difficult with all Indian thought. It's not always easy to date things and to figure out who wrote this, when did they write it, what to speak of, when did it fall within the narrative of a particular author's life. I'm doing a lot of work on a fellow named Jiva Goswami, a Gaudiya Vaishnava scholar, a great theologian, great philosopher, great thinker.
For sure.
But it's hard to tell.
Yeah.
Exactly when did he write certain things? The precise dates that he lived we've got a pretty decent idea, but not a tremendous. The narrative of his life it seemed to have been a sensibility of Indian thought that we don't share in the West, is maybe another big difference of, historicizing things and
Hmm.
giving a very precise and um, dispassionate historical picture. So yeah, that's a good question. So that's my answer. I hope I I hope
It's
I made it clear. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I know I put you on the spot a bit with
No,
that,
that's
but
good. I
I
appreciate
think your answer actually was superb. The reason I say that is, number one, I agree with you, which is being a voluminous piece of work, some guidance on how to proceed with it, how to go about it, would definitely help, because that puts some structured learning to it. And second, yes, I can relate to what you're saying. The historical dating of things is definitely more in the western side of the world versus the eastern side of the world. So
Yeah.
really like it, and I guess probably I think for folks who want to go more into an inquiry path, and professors like you, I think we got our work cut out is to is to help with this learning, help with the structure, put it together.
Yeah.
So I think that's precisely why I go back to where you started, on what got you into this. I think
Right.
that's probably one of the reasons why it gets us all interested in digging more and learning more and understanding more into these concepts and into these messages and sayings. I think probably that's the excitement of it, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. And this historical issue, that's another big topic
Yeah.
of difference. The location of a text within a particular time and space.
Yep.
Um, that's
Very
another,
good.
yeah, another topic.
John, can't thank you enough for this. This has been
My
an
pleasure.
engaging
This is fun.
engaging discussion.
This was a lot of fun. Thank you. Thank you for the
And
great
I will
questions.
Yeah, I will go back and re-listen to it. I absolutely want to make sure it gets embedded, and I'm sure this would be of amazing value to number one, your students, to the individuals you work with, but also to the broader community. Particularly since we covered so many aspects and the pervasiveness of bhakti, to your point, coming out of Bhagavata. Thank you so much. And with
My
this,
pleasure.
we'll end the recording. I look forward in
Good.
talking to you soon.
Good. Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, likewise. I look forward to following up on this. This is a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Okay.